Thank you for inviting me to this inspiring gathering in Copenhagen. As Tom this morning told us about the situation in the world and the strategic situation, he mentioned the fact that in the middle of the whole, when the escalation of the Ukrainian crisis was taking place, and at the time when the Crimean referendum was taking place, and the whole so-called the Crimea became part of Russia, and then all the threats were escalating from the West. At the same time, the Chinese president was in Europe, in a complete contrast to what the Europeans are doing in trying to escalate the strategic situation into a confrontation with Russia, which will lead to a world war fought with thermonuclear weapons rather than conventional weapons. The Chinese president was in Europe to present something which is completely different, is that instead of this kind of stupid conflict, we could have both economic and cultural cooperation between these two poles in the East and the West. And the fact is, it's not only the Chinese, our organization, our movement, and the Schiller Institute, we are right now in the middle of this conflict. We are the peacemakers. We are the ones who are building the bridges between the West and the East, between trying to present, as Lyndon LaRouche himself was on Russian TV, on Chinese TV, with LaRouche's associates too, are presented in Asia, in China, and in Russia, and in Iran, and other countries, that these are the type of people we want to have a dialogue with. These kind of ideas we want to work with Europe and the United States on. So it's a fascinating situation, because it can break either way, because if we succeed in our campaigns to stop this war escalation, if our friends in the United States succeed in getting rid of Obama through impeachment, then we can start building on a completely new path for a whole human civilization, not only for Europe and Asia and so on. Can take the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit more in subjective terms, because I have been in the Schiller Institute and this organization for now 20 years exactly. I've been active in this organization, and also because I believe that history is a subjective thing. Not simply studying history, but participating in history. It's a very, very personal thing. And the more we learn of history, the more it should become part of our personal mission, that we pick the best of our history and try to give something to the future. So I'm taking these things very personally, and therefore I'm going to speak in a personal manner about the subject of what is called the Silk Road, which I say is an ancient image of the future. Because the Silk Road is an ancient idea, but it's exactly that idea which can frame or shape our future. Now, this is the world land bridge. It's not simply the Eurasian land bridge. And what we have here is that it's an image of the future. It's a poetic, artistic image of the future. It's not complete. And it's therefore up to every nation to participate in making this image, this idea, become true. Now, certain parts of it, certain nations are working on this. It's also up to every individual in every society to make sure that their life, their mission is to make this become a reality. And therefore it's more of a personal mission for each and every one of us, although we are in an organization working together as one force, but also as members of nations, citizens of nations, that we take this also personally. Now, so this is it's a challenge how to intervene on history today with all the problems we have, with the limited forces that exist that are still reasonable, to make sure that civilization doesn't end and that this kind of idea becomes a reality. Now, the Silk Road idea, which is the traditional, if you take the next, the traditional idea of the Silk Road is like you have a caravan of camels that are going slowly in the desert, you know, carrying silk and spices from China to Europe. You know? It's a warning for people who have a romantic idea today about the Chinese Silk Road idea. The idea of the Silk Road, both the ancient and also what we want it to be now, is not to transport something from point A to point B. That's not the thing. It's not to transport silk or spices or oil or food from point A to point B. And that's a false idea of the Silk Road. It was never like this. It was at a certain point when imperialist and oligarchical forces controlled Europe, is that the idea of, especially the maritime empires, Venice, the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, represented by the East India Company, the Portuguese Empire, that they used the sea routes to transfer wealth from point A to point B. It's like looting other nations. But that's a false idea. It does not promote civilization. It actually kills civilization. Now I have a better image of what really was going on. I'm sorry I had to take a picture of that because it's a slideshow. If you can see, this is somewhere in Asia. This is the Arab Peninsula, the Gulf, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean. This is Spain, the Atlantic. This is a trade routes and major cities in the 10th to the 13th century. It was an enormous density of city building, building cultural centers and economic centers, not simply on both sides of the Silk Road, but in between. So the challenge for us now, as for the Eurasian land bridge, is how do we build civilization and develop civilization between point A and point B? That this is the real issue. When we talk about the Eurasian land bridge or the new Silk Road, we are not talking about a railway which goes from China to Germany or to Holland. We are talking about development corridors. These are corridors that could be up to 100, 150 kilometers wide, with industrial centers, agro-industrial centers, scientific centers, railways, roads, water canals, all kinds of things. Yes, we need to transport goods, machines, tools from one place to another where it is needed. But that's not simply the purpose, it's not the intention, that's the method. But the intention is that we want to bring a new civilization in cooperation between sovereign nation states. So this was the situation. Now even today, some of these centers, cultural centers, don't even exist. That existed in the 9th and 10th century. Because we had a dark age period where the oligarchical tendency took over. Can you see the next slide? Now, I would go back to a little bit of a history, which I have myself, I'm starting to discover. I don't have the complete picture, but I'm starting to discover some very interesting things about what was going on between China, the Islamic world, and Europe in that time. And what you stumble on, in fact, which is a part of what I'm describing as that it was a question of building civilization rather than transporting goods, is that the most important commodity at a certain period, at the 8th century, that was being shipped from China to what is today the Middle East or Southwest Asia, where the Islamic State was flourishing and expanding, was not silk, it was not spices, it was paper. Paper was the most important commodity that was coming from China. The Chinese developed the production of paper from wood pulp and fiber, as opposed to papyrus, which the Egyptians had. But the papyrus is a much more limited. You cannot produce large quantities of it, and it takes enormous amount of raw materials, reed and so on. But the Chinese in the 1st century after Christ, the Han Dynasty, they had developed the technique to produce paper from wood pulp. And that way they could mass produce paper, which was used then for writing, painting, and so on. When the Islamic Renaissance speeded up in the 8th century, in the middle of the 8th century, there was enormous need for both translating knowledge from other cultures, from the East, all kinds of sciences, philosophy, and so on, medical science, and that this should be proliferated. So you needed books to transfer the ideas and the knowledge from one place to the other, that students could read them, people could read them, scientists could read them, and so on and so forth. So there was enormous demand for paper. And that was the big commodity that was coming from China, which is much, much more valuable even in cultural terms than spices and silk and so on. So there was an enormous paper trade going on. But then at a certain point with the expansion of the Islamic State in 750, this is a map of the Tang Dynasty, which was a dynasty which had expanded actually into what is today Central Asia. Around the same time the Islamic State was expanding. So the Islamic State had also expanded all the way to Central Asia, and they clashed in a battle. The first battle was the Battle of Tlas or Talash in 750. But after that there was a treaty signed which demarked where the two states' borders would be. But one interesting thing, according to historians, that some of the Chinese prisoners, two of them actually, they were experts in paper production. So they were taken to Baghdad. Not to Baghdad, to Kufa, because Baghdad was not built yet. I was going to go through that. In 750, they took these people and they got from them the information how to produce paper. And then Baghdad became a major center for the production of paper, which then expanded into Northern Africa and later into Spain and Europe. So now what happened is that the hostility between the Chinese and the Islamic State, it ceased. Actually, Prophet Muhammad himself had said to his followers, that they should seek knowledge even if it was in China. It's a famous saying of the Prophet Muhammad. And then, after the death of Prophet Muhammad, at the time of the Caliphate Uthman, an ambassador was sent to China, to the Tang Dynasty. Before these battles, before 750, it's like 630, around that period. They sent Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas. He was one of the companions of Prophet, also a military general. Can have the next picture. And he visited the palace of the Tang emperor in Xi'an, or Chang'an, which was the capital of China. He had a discussion with the emperor, the Chinese emperor, about Islam and the Islamic teachings and the idea of God and creation. And the emperor found out that this is very close to the Confucian monotheistic idea of God and man's role in the world. So he thought this is great. They could establish good relations with the Muslims. And the first mosque was established in Xi'an. I have some pictures. This is one of the oldest.
Should we keep going?
Yes. One of the oldest mosques is in Xi'an. It was built around 640. And it was rebuilt and renovated and kept in spite of many turbulences and wars that took place in China. But this mosque exists until today in China. You can just roll the other pictures. Now there's a large community of Muslims in China since that time. And also at the time of in 755, after the first battle between the Muslims and the Tang Dynasty armies in Central Asia, which I mentioned, there was a rebellion in China itself. It was called the Lushan Rebellion in 755. That's 5 years after the battle between the Muslims and the Tang Dynasty army. And the Tang Dynasty emperor, there was a rebellion from one of his generals to establish another dynasty and overthrow him. He asked Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, the Caliphate in Iraq, in Kufa, for assistance. So Chinese historians say that there were about, some say 20,000, some say 10,000 Muslim soldiers who went to China to support the Tang emperor against the rebellion. And then he managed to crush the rebellion and stay in power. But those 10,000, many of them settled in China and established a large Muslim community, and they were free to practice their religion. And now there's a large community of Chinese, not the Uyghurs, not the ones in Xinjiang in Western, who are part of a Central Asian constellation. No, these are in the south of China, and they are ethnic Chinese, but they have Islam as their religion. They have had this for more than 1,300 years. They are called the Hui Chinese, Hui Muslim Chinese, and they are loyal to the Chinese state. So they don't consider themselves as a minority, or there are many different ethnicities in China that are recognized, and the Hui Muslims are one of these ethnicities, and they actually participated in defending the state against other dynasties, against the Mongols. There's one case which I'm going to mention, but just mention the massacre which took place in January at the Kunming train station in China, where a group of men armed with knives, maybe so you heard in the news, they killed about 20-30 people. Now these terrorists, as reports have said, that these are from the Uyghur, Saudi-backed Islamic groups. These were not, but Kunming is one of the big centers for the Hui Muslim population, which traditionally have been part of China and loyal to China for many, many years. So it's not simply only a terrorist act, it's also a provocation against the Chinese Muslims by attacking the same city where it's a major center for them. Because take another picture. So there's this Anglo-Saudi game which is going on. Yeah, you can keep it there. To destabilize China by using Muslims. But the fact is that Muslims have been an integral part of China's history. And it's the case of the Zheng He. He was an admiral in the Chinese Navy, and he was a close friend of the emperor. He grew up together with him in the household of the emperor because his parents were killed in one of these rebellions, and he developed to become was the leader of the Chinese Navy, and he made this trip around in the 15th century to visit all these other areas, and he came all the way to the Hormuz. Hormuz is an interesting city. We'll come to it next soon. But also came to Aden and to Jeddah, actually, not to Mecca. There are conflicting reports if he went to Mecca or not for the pilgrimage or not. But that's not. But the issue is that the Chinese had already, in terms of that, this was not an invasion. I think this was a peaceful embassy to visit these regions. You can take the next. Zheng He is a legend in China. There are many legends and myths about him, but what is known about him is this journey. It's like Christopher Columbus or something for the Chinese. Can take the next. This is one of his ships, one of the treasure ships. So the idea for them is to continue to build up on this region. The problem is that by that time in the 15th century, there was no real Islamic state. We had the Ottoman Empire, but the rest of the Gulf region, East Africa, so there was no major civilization or any major state there. So the world was already dominated by the European, first Venetian, but also later the Dutch, Portuguese, and so on. So China was pushed back as a world power, and later subdued by the British and other European colonial powers. But anyways, there's the idea that there was always this contact and communication between China and the Islamic world. I can take the next one. So just briefly on the Islamic Renaissance, this is a map of the world by Abu Hassan al-Mas'udi. He was an astronomer, scientist, and geographer, and a traveler. He traveled around the world. But he also studied the Greek, Herodotus history, and other Greek works to try to define, the world map.
It's a very good map.
Yeah, it's a very good map. It's just funny. It's that all the letters are upside down. They're upside down for some reason. I'll have to figure out. But it's like here. This is, I suspect, in Africa. This is the Congo River because it's a very large river. So it's considered as here it says terra incognita, unknown land. This is the Slavs. This is
That's Australia, right?
Sweden, and maybe
And all
it's
the
Australia,
barbarians
yeah.
somewhere
Yeah.
there.
Possible.
You can recognize Europe very clearly. And,
Right. So this Al-Mas'udi, he was also a scientist. He was born in Baghdad and he traveled around. But Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, the Arab Caliphate which I mentioned, he sent the soldiers to help the Chinese Tang emperor. He built Baghdad in 767 as a modern city. And I wrote an article recently. It's called Baghdad 767, a melting pot for global civilization or universal civilization. And it's very interesting because in the history of Al-Tabari, a historian, the capital of the Islamic State in Iraq was in Kufa, south of Baghdad. But there were many intrigues in that city, so Al-Mansur, he wanted to build another city away from there. So he went to an area which is the narrowest between the Tigris and Euphrates, and he stayed there overnight. There was a monastery next to him. So he asked the monks, the Christian monks, about the area, the climate, the water quality, and so on. But in the morning, when he woke up, according to this historian, he said to his follower, his people, said, "Look, here in the east, there is nothing between us and China. It's like just our neighbors are China." And then he says, in the west, we can get all the goods from what is today, it's called Al Jazeera. It's between the Tigris and Euphrates in what is today Turkey. We can get all the trade from North Africa and so on and so forth. So he said, this is a perfect place to build our capital, because this becomes the center of the world between China, between Europe, between Africa and so on. So people at that time, they thought about these as major, in a strategic sense. Not limited to a small place. Like today, the world looks very big for people. Actually, at that time, it looked much, much smaller. People could travel to China, could travel to Spain, and so on. Now, many people cannot even travel to the next country because there are so many controls and problems for people to move around. So the idea was that in Baghdad, then we had the development of the Islamic Renaissance. As I said, they needed paper, they needed to bring knowledge, they brought everything possible from the Greeks, which was under Byzantium control. They translated Plato, Aristotle, the other, Pythagoras, everything they could get hold of. It was translated in the House of Wisdom, it was called. And some legends say that each translation the translator would get its weight in gold from the Caliphate. That is so valuable. Maybe it's not true or not, but the enormous emphasis was put on knowledge. That this is the basis for the Islamic religion and the greatness of the Islamic nation. Not only simply knowledge of the Quran and the religious text, no, the knowledge of all human civilizations, whether it's Greece, China, India, or anywhere else. You bring it, we study it, we verify it, and we make it part of our own. It becomes a universal humanist culture which we represent today. Later someone else can represent it, but we want this, this is our heritage. It's not simply a Chinese heritage or Greek heritage or anything. So this was the spirit of the Islamic Renaissance, which was centered in Baghdad, and then of course was moved later into Spain, Andalus, and so on and so forth. So as it said, that the European got Plato through the Muslims, translated back into Latin from Arabic, because the Arabs were the only ones who had many of these manuscripts. They had disappeared from Europe, especially in western part of Europe. You couldn't get hold of Plato.
Yeah, because the Alexandria, Alexandria library burnt down, didn't it?
Yeah, but there a lot of manuscripts were kept in what is today Syria, Lebanon. There were monasteries. There were in churches. A lot of these manuscripts were kept, but also the Byzantine emperors, they also kept the Greek manuscripts, but it was not public knowledge. They didn't want the people to know about them or read them. So in one famous battle between Al-Ma'mun's army around 800 10 with the Byzantine army. They had many Byzantine officers taken as prisoners. So he suggested to the Roman emperor to exchange them for manuscripts, Greek works, to exchange the prisoners for them. Because the Byzantine Empire, they didn't want to give the Muslims these manuscripts. So they had to, they would send spies, intelligence officers, young people. I wrote about them in my article, these the Banu Musa brothers. They would travel into the Byzantine Empire and try to find manuscripts. Or they would try to find young people who had very good knowledge of Greek, Assyrian, and Arabic, and recruit them and take them back to Baghdad, to the House of Wisdom, where they could work on translation. They worked on astronomy. The translators were not simply translators. The translators were scientists. They were astronomers. There's a group, the Banu Musa brothers, and a group of astronomers. They went out in the west of Baghdad to replicate Eratosthenes' measurement of the circumference of Earth. You know, they went out and we have written, or in our publication, about how Eratosthenes measured the circumference of Earth based on the angle of the shadow of the sun cast in a half sphere. But these, the Arab astronomers, they didn't use the sun, they used the stars to see the difference in the angle between a point in the north and the south. 1 degree difference between a position in northern Iraq and one in south, and then they measure the distance between the 2 points multiplied by 360 degrees. Then you can approximately discover the circumference of Earth in that way. So they gave that as a present to Al-Ma'mun, the Caliphate, who was he was the sponsor and the protector of the scientists in the House of Wisdom. So anyway, this is great Islamic Renaissance. Also, there is this very, very important alliance between the Islamic State, Harun al-Rashid specifically, who was the son of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, who built Baghdad, with Charlemagne in Europe. And Charlemagne here in Europe is maybe considered the founder of the modern Europe in a sense, because he had this also humanist tendency to build a modern state based on scientific development, scientific knowledge, and so on. But he had a strategic alliance with Harun al-Rashid against the Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. And there were many exchanges. There were some articles which I and other members wrote about. This is not time to go through it. But at the same time, you had this alliance with China. You had an alliance with Charlemagne in Europe against the empire. But gradually, the Islamic State started to disintegrate. There were many splits, but also there were many intrigues. And then this was followed by the Crusades between 1095 and 1290, about 200 years of religious wars, where the Crusaders were being mobilized from Europe to attack the Islamic State in the East, and in the name of freeing Jerusalem, which is total nonsense, because these were mercenaries who were mostly financed, armed by Venice to control the trade centers and ports on the Mediterranean, but ultimately to crush the powerful Islamic State, because it was a hindrance for them, for their trade, what they call from point A to point B, that they could have trade from without having to work with the Islamic State, or it will not block that kind of trade. But the major advantage of the Crusades for Venice was that they controlled all trade in the Mediterranean. They controlled almost all the ports in the Mediterranean with the help of the Crusaders. But the end result of that, they destroyed civilization in what is today the Middle East. And there are also indications that they collaborated with the Mongols, who had first attacked the Chinese Tang Dynasty, almost destroyed Chinese culture, but then they turned westward to destroy the Islamic State. They were not stopped before they reached Egypt. So you had a period of a dark age then following in this whole region, all the way from China to Central Asia to Baghdad and so on. The only place which survived was Spain, and the Andalus, which survived until 1490. when the Habsburgs and the Inquisition came and destroyed even that state, and started the process of religious wars in Europe itself, 100 years wars and 30 years wars and so on and so forth. And then we had this whole, but then in contrast to that, we had the European Renaissance, taking the torch from the Muslims to keep this human civilization, but also basically based on the Platonic ideas, scientific and philosophical ideas. And then we had the discovery of America, the establishment of the American Republic, and so on, which kept civilization actually going for a bit more in the middle of all these imperialist wars for looting nations and fighting against the idea of the Renaissance. You can take the next one. So all this historical background as this work in progress for me, and it's also a new view of this whole historic relationship and what that means for us today. Because the same idea of divide and conquer, the Anglo-Saudis are pushing this idea of religious wars, not only between Shia and Sunni in Iraq and Syria and the Gulf, but also the idea of the Chechens against the Russians, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang against the Chinese, and so on and so forth. All these forces are being moved centrally by what we call the Anglo-Saudi axis, which is to use religion as a geopolitical tool and supporting terrorist groups, drug. So anyway, so I come to the subjective part where our involvement as a Schiller Institute, as a movement, but also for us as individuals, if we can recreate that Renaissance, because we are risking a new dark age, as is evident from the destruction of many countries right now, in North Africa, Syria, now Ukraine. But the idea which Tom this morning explained, that the target is to destroy Russia, to destroy China. Our idea is completely different. We want to support Russia and China and get them to contribute with us here in Europe and in the United States in building civilization. So we can mobilize all forces that exist there. Can take the next one. So in the Helga Larouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute, is known in China as the Silk Road Lady, the Iron Lady of the Silk Road. And she has been popularized in a certain way in China, but also in other places, because the Schiller Institute, and she personally took this as her personal mission, in addition to preserving Europe as a civilization, but that to build the bridges between the Asian culture and the Western European culture and the Islamic cultures. Can take the next. So the Larouche idea, it emerged in 1990 after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and his idea was to use the enormous potential, technological potential, which still existed in Western Europe, what's called the Berlin, Paris, Vienna triangle, productive triangle, is that the technological industrial potential should be used to rebuild some sort of a Marshall Plan into Eastern Europe and Russia, and incorporate these nations' existing potential to rebuild all of Europe and benefit also our collapsing economies here in the West, and launch a new industrial movement in the European continent. Can take the next. But also as this idea developed into how to connect this great industrial technological center to the largest concentrations of world populations in the East, and how to build a bridge with these other nations. But still, our idea, the Schiller Institute and Larouche's idea, is not to bring cheap stuff from China to Europe. The idea was to develop the landmass, the Eurasian landmass, and even Africa, to incorporate them in this massive reconstruction process. This is the special report, the first comprehensive study of this new Silk Road what the Chinese started. Helga Sepp-LaRouche was invited to China in 1996, but even before that, this idea of rebuilding the Silk Road and the Eurasian land bridge was popularized by the Schiller Institute internationally, by internet conferences, media interventions in different countries, and so on and so forth. But in 1996 was a turning point when the Chinese government itself convening an international conference in Beijing to announce that the new Silk Road is China's future strategy. That this is China's plan for the future. This is not going to change. And symbolically, Helga Sepp-LaRouche, and in real terms, was invited with some associates to attend this conference. Can take the next one. Next. Yeah, this is Helga Sepp-LaRouche in her second visit to China, where the Chinese had already built this, what they call the end of the Eurasian land bridge, the terminal there, which is in the Far East, which from there to start. So the Chinese television invited her can go back to the report. So in 95, 96, I had just joined the organization. I just joined the Schiller Institute in 94. I was living in Sweden, but then I moved to Germany temporarily to work with our international group there. So we had the Eurasian Land Bridge report. As I said, the most comprehensive study of this whole idea, what this is about. And I was one of the writers in this, for this report, because I looked at how the Southwest Asia and the Arab world could be connected to this world land bridge, because I didn't want my nation and other nations to be, it's not because of me, but I had to take a personal responsibility to make sure that Iraq, Iran, Egypt, the rest of the Arab world is connected to this Eurasian land bridge, and I took it as a personal thing. So I worked with our other members to compile this 200 pages report. But then, since then, it has become part of the dynamic of our movement to work for this idea. Okay? Continue. This was the first image of the new Silk Road. The three, yes. Okay. These are the three main connection lines, and then branching into Africa, South Asia, and so on and so forth. But the whole time, what we were trying to explain to nations and governments and experts is this is not about a railway. This is not point A to point B. This is about developing nations, bringing technology, scientific knowledge, and exchange between all nations, but at sovereign nation states, not like a globalized system under the UN or under the EU or under NATO. No, each nation has to choose to be part of this, and to be completely stupid not to join this. But the idea is to build civilization. The next. So Helga Sepp-LaRouche and Lyndon LaRouche and other associates have been traveling around the world to bring this idea to other people, but also the idea of a new world economic order, because Lyndon LaRouche had forecast already at least in 1995, he presented what is called the typical collapse function, the triple curve, in a conference in the Vatican, how the transatlantic or the Western financial and banking system is going to collapse in the immediate period. So the idea for LaRouche was not simply just to build this Eurasian land, but to find an alternative to this collapsing, dying financial and banking system. And part of that was to work with other nations and bring this idea of an alternative based on a new financial and credit system, but also based on the building of the Eurasian land. So this is Lyndon and Helga Sepp-LaRouche with the President of India sometime in the year 2000, I guess. Can take the next. Mr. LaRouche also, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, because of his previous work on the Strategic Defense Initiative, and he had skirmishes with the Soviet institutions, but also scientists and economists in Russia, they had very deep respect for Mr. LaRouche and his ideas, and so immediately he became a dialogue partner from the United States with the Russian Academy of Sciences, and he was very frequently in Russia, discussing with scientists, but even with, this is a seminar held in the Russian parliament itself in 2001, I guess. And this is Mr. Sergei Glaziev, who was a member of the parliament, but he's also a very renowned economist in Russia, but he's also one of the closest advisors to Vladimir Putin, the president right now. He was put on the top of the list of the people who should be sanctioned by the United States and the EU. He also had designed the policy towards Ukraine, how to integrate Ukraine before the coup into the Eurasian bloc, and how Ukraine would benefit from that. So he is one of the people who's on the list of threatened targets by the British, the United States, and the EU. So, but the idea was that this is becoming a global movement. So it's not simply we telling, trying to convince other people. This has been taken now, as I said. China made it its strategic option. Russia started working on that, the development of Eastern Russia, Siberia, and how Siberia's potential for development and raw material production is key to China's and India's future. So that the Russians realized that their future is in the Eurasian. As you all remember, Russia was integrated into the transatlantic financial and banking system after the fall of communism through the shock therapy and the looting of Russia under the years of Yeltsin, where Russia was completely looted and its raw materials were put in the hands of some oligarchs who all reside in London. But then when Vladimir Putin came in and a totally new group came in, Russia's orientation changed. And in the process of the dialogue with LaRouche, the orientation of Russia was to go not to be a simple raw materials exporter, but that it's a major global economic power and industrial power that should focus on building its infrastructure, industry, scientific research, and so on and so forth, and go with the orientation with cooperation with China and East Asia. So can take the next. So this has developed. This is also Mr. LaRouche was in Abu Dhabi in 2002. This created a lot of stirred a lot of people in the British, American, and Saudi circles, and they so it was a conference about the future of oil in world politics. Mr. LaRouche presented a fantastic image of the collapse of the Western financial and banking system, but he then, what he termed, there's a lifeboat we can all take, establish a new system, and also based on building the physical economies of nations. But he also urged the Arab nations that they should use not simply their oil power, but their position, their geographical position between three continents to develop their economies and become industrial economies, rather than just exporters of oil where the money then wasted on weapons and other silly. So, so Mr. LaRouche was becoming, and the Schiller Institute becoming very, not simply accepted, but the ideas started to fascinate people all over the world. But then we had this whole backlash, both against us in these parts of the world, but also that the new offensive from the Dark Ages forces, the British, Tony Blair and George Bush's alliance to first invade Iraq and end what Tom said earlier, is that to put an end to the Westphalian peace system of sovereignty of nations and impose an imperial system on nations, regime change, which is continuing until today. So now here we are in a completely different situation, but it can change into either direction. Depends on what we can do, what other people can do to shift from this imperial system, the Dark Age, into a Renaissance. Can take the next. So these are some of the things I have been personally involved in, is to bring this idea also to Southwest Asia, to the Arab world, but also to Iran. I was in Iran twice in a conference about, people like to talk about oil politics, oil and gas, because this is what everybody says, this is what's special about the Middle East, about the Gulf. They have a lot of oil and gas, and the world needs it. So all the games, all the geopolitical games, all the wars are about the oil. But there's another aspect, like the whole, what our members can call economics of extinction. It's the same thing. It's like in Europe now, in the middle of this crisis with Russia, Europe is becoming more and more dependent on Russian gas to run the energy production. That the Germans shut down their nuclear power and become dependent on Russia to light their houses and industries. You know, this is completely stupid. I'm not against cooperation between Russia, but the simple idea of burning natural gas to produce power is the very, very stupid idea. You know, because you have much more efficient means of producing energy, like nuclear power, rather than using natural gas. Natural gas and petroleum, oil, is an important industrial material. So I understand that we got into this internal combustion engine mechanism. It's very difficult to get rid of it because we don't have focus on massive modern public transport systems. So we are still dependent on our cars, and we need to have petroleum in the cars. But the raw oil and gas, these are very important industrial materials that we can use for producing all kinds of chemicals. We can use fertilizers, but from oil we can use plastics, which now plastics is in everything. Building material, even cars are produced to a large extent of plastics. All medical instruments, almost, you go into a hospital, it's all plastic. The whole hospital is plastic, from the furniture to the medical instruments. Plastic goes into everything. It's an excellent material for this kind of use. So it's completely idiotic to burn it when you can use something else to produce energy. So this whole idea, so the idea is that geopolitics of oil, the last 100 years, is a British creation. That they can manipulate the rest of the world and these countries based on if they can control the oil or not, or they can control the governments that control the oil or not. So this whole imperial game the last 100 years has been based on how to control the oil, because everybody in the world needs oil. So our idea and my intervention in this region right now is to make sure that these nations themselves, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, they build nuclear power. And then they use the oil and gas as industrial material, and we can sell it to much, much higher value to the rest of the world. Now it's like there's an Iranian taxi driver. He told me our politicians are so stupid that we sell a barrel of oil to Japan for $100. The Japanese sell it back to us for $400. Because the Japanese take the oil and they refine it and they separate the different elements and ingredients, motor oil, plastics, and then they sell it back at a much higher value to the people in the Gulf. You know? I mean, they are smart. You raise the value of the raw material by making it useful in other terms, much, much higher benefit for the same oil, which otherwise can be burned. So it's the idea that these nations, we have a movement now for nuclear power. Iran is insisting on having nuclear power. The United Arab Emirates, they are building 4 nuclear power plants. The Saudis even have plans for nuclear power, and so on and so forth. That this is the future. And they are working with Asia and Russia to do that, because Western Europe and the United States are hopeless in these terms. Not because they cannot build them, but that they refuse to build them. So anyways, I mentioned earlier this Chinese voyager. He went to Hormuz. I can take the next. This is Bandar Abbas, the city which I was there for a couple of conferences. I wrote reports about it. I'm not going to go through that. But there is an interesting thing about this the Strait of Hormuz. This is the island which I will show you soon. But there is all imperial powers. They built fortresses in these points. And the Portuguese fortress, because all the trade to Asia had to be protected by garrisons along the way. But this Strait of Hormuz has become one of the most, it's called a world energy choke points. You know, you can choke the world if you do something. It's a very narrow area. You see, it's very shallow water too, about 50 meters at the deepest. But this area where the ships go into the Gulf and out of the Gulf is like just a few kilometers wide. And through this, every day, about 17 million barrels of oil and other large quantity of natural gas move from this region to where? Not to the US, not to Europe, they go to Asia. So the biggest importers of oil from the region are Japan, China, South Korea, India. These are the large, they depend on this. Japan, when I was in Japan, I presented this. I'm going to present some of the other facts to people. They know that they have to get 2 million barrels of oil every day to the ports in Japan. 2 million barrels every day have to arrive to Japanese ports. If anything happens, half of Japan will shut down. Yeah? So this is a big blackmail. So I was telling the people in Japan I met, I was in my presentations, I said, look, go back to nuclear power. You will be killed economically. And I read for them something which I'm going to read here about what the British are planning for this.
Well, the German media yesterday reported that Japan has made a final decision to return back to nuclear power.
Yes.
That they had decided to go out, and now they've rescinded that. They're going to send the oversight authorities to check every single plant, but then they're going to...
Yes. Also build new generation nuclear power. They even have fusion research facility there in Japan. So, but they, like the rest of the formerly industrial nations, they are having problems. So this is a major strategic problem for the world, an economic problem for the world, which is controlled by British, American, and their allies, these forces. You can take the next. It's just an image of the Strait of Hormuz from the side of Iran, where I was. This is from the Hormuz Island, which I pointed at. It's a fascinating place in other terms, but yeah, you can see, if you have a sharper picture, you see the oil tankers moving in the horizon, going to. But it's
Not quite.
yeah, it's too. I could just take the next. This is me. It's a cliff from there. It's very like 40 meters down. This is a Portuguese fortress built in the 1590s, because all the major imperial forces, they had to protect their ships. They're going from Asia to, so they had to build these fortresses to back their ships and navy, because it's a long way from Europe to Asia. Yeah, this is a chart of the world reserves of oil. In the Middle East, 56%. And then you have Russia, North America, Africa. But the largest concentration of hydrocarbons is in the Middle East, which is the world's most unstable place right now. Can take the next. And then you look at the largest consumers who are growing in consumption are China, Japan, and the United States. These are the largest importers of oil and gas from the world. But unlike the United States, these two, Japan and China, depend almost completely on the Gulf. The United States, they don't need the Gulf. They get around 5 to 8% from the Gulf. It's too far distant. They get from Alaska, from Gulf of Mexico, and so on.
Right.
But these two are dependent on the unstable oil, Middle East region. You can take the next. Yeah, Japan's total energy consumption. This is from my presentation in Japan, so it could not be. These are the top 10 oil importers. So you see the United States is in top, but it's not dependent. You have China, Japan, India, Germany, South Korea, and so on, Taiwan. So these are all industrial nations or emerging industrial nations, but they all depend on imported oil and gas, which comes, as I said, from the Gulf. These are millions of barrels per day they need to get every day. Take the next. So this, yesterday I read this for some people. This is from the British military think tank called the Royal United Services Institute. It's a very high-level British think tank whose clients are the Queen of England. These briefings, they say in their website, the Queen of England reads their briefings, the government, the Prime Minister, members of Parliament, all the ministries, they brag about it. But this is a very, very old institution, and what they say have to be taken seriously. But what people can read, it's available on internet. If you search the internet, you can find it. They don't make a secret of it. But the whole discussion is that they say Britain should go back to the Middle East. But in the report they say, well, the fact is we never left the Middle East. But we are going back there with a new idea. We will need to bring, because after the colonial period, they controlled the Gulf states through intelligence services, security agreements, and controlling the finances of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait. They are all controlled by British financial institutions. They tell them where to invest the oil money. And I have showed earlier presentations how this works, how British and some American institutions control the oil money in the Gulf, where it's invested. But anyway, the British say we have to go back to there because Europe is collapsing economically. We have we have wars in North Africa and the northern part of the Middle East, but the southern part of the Gulf, that's Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates, we have to be present there to protect those sheikhs, although they are not democratic. But these are our natural allies. We have to. Why? Because the world depends on that, and also they say very clearly one important reason for controlling that region is that Obama has said that he wants to focus on what he calls Asia pivot, to move US strategic and military forces to the east, to encircle China and to stop China's growing strategic ambitions. So they are moving into the Eastern theater, military theater, with military bases, including in Australia, and using the provocations between China and Japan, South and North Korea, to have more American presence there. The British say, well, we cannot let the Americans move there without making sure that we control the Gulf. Why? Because, as they say in the report, one important element in Mr. Obama's, our dear friend, our special relationship, we're going to help the Americans in the East because the nations in the East depend on the oil from the Gulf. So this is our big contribution to our American friends. We can kill the Chinese and anybody in the East. We can destroy their economies by controlling the Gulf states. So this is our next move. When the world goes into chaos in North Africa, Eastern Europe, and so on, and the European Union economy collapses, this is our big asset. And they don't make a secret about that, because I don't know if any politicians in the EU will understand what is written here, or they can understand the intention of it. So anyway, this is public, so this is a very big danger, not simply for the nations of the Gulf, but it's a danger for the whole world economy. Because as I mentioned, in the Hormuz Strait, if you block the Hormuz Strait, if there's a war with Iran, just forget it. There will be no oil coming out. 40% of the world oil export will just stop. That means no cars here in Copenhagen. The lights have to be turned off every now and then, and so on and so forth. So and China, Japan, South Korea, they'll have to shut down their factories. So this is a very, very dangerous situation, which the British are saying, oh, this is our next great strategic gain. So we can take the next one. So anyway, instead of having this region being the choke point of the world geopolitics and oil and so on, so our idea is that we should develop this region. They have to have a new peace process, which Helga Tsep-LaRouche presented 2 years ago, on having a unified concept for the development of the whole Southwest Asia region, and that Europe, Russia, China, the United States should participate in it. Because this area is potentially going to be one of the largest areas of economic growth in the future. We have young populations, very well educated, enormous raw materials, a fantastic geographical position between 3 continents, that this is a very, very promising. In this red spot I mentioned, there are about 400 million people living there. Most of them are young people, and they are looking at the future. So this could be another workshop for the world, for the major industrial nations to cooperate to develop this region. I'm not going to go through, because it's getting to a time limit, on the whole question of what this project implies, which is about, I had presented in other conferences, the fighting desertifications and bringing water to this region, and making sure that there's enough water, agriculture, and so on, so you stop. Because desertification and water shortage is an enormous, enormous existential problem for almost all these nations. Actually extends from Mauritania and the Atlantic all the way to China. These are desert areas which are expanded. And they destroy farms, they destroy even cities, and so on. So this has to be dealt with as a real existential threat to civilization, in addition to war itself. So I think I'm going to stop here, but I just wanted to re-emphasize that what we do as individuals and as a group, in every nation we are, or we can go to other nations and talk, this has an impact. This can change world politics. Because many people don't really, they cannot see the long arc of history. They look at events today. One day there is invasion of Iraq, the next day there is Libya, the other day there is Syria, and then there is Ukraine. But people look at it as these are separate things. They happen. You wake up in the morning, something had happened. But they don't look at the process, the long-term process of why these things are happening, who's behind them, what is the intention of the people behind them. You know? So it's not, we have to look at history in that sense, but also look at history not as an objective, interesting matter, but as I presented today, this is, what are the ingredients of civilization and Renaissance? We have to learn these things, because we will, or we want to work to build a Renaissance, but we need to learn these things and to use them as our personal tools to help people understand the world, but also to decide for themselves what role they want to play in that role. Do they want a new Renaissance, or do they want a new Dark Age? So that's the basis of my presentation. It's not just simply giving some interesting hints from history or some nice pictures, but it's really to look at this as something very personal. And that way it will help you actually understand much, much better than just looking at things objectively. Thank you.
When we're talking about nuclear power, you told us about Japan turning on, because you told us about Japan turning on nuclear power again, and they shut it down due to the Fukushima disaster, which is still ongoing. But you know, uranium as a tool for nuclear power is very unstable, and we don't have that much of it. Actually, if the whole world converted to uranium and nuclear power, we only had enough for 10 years. But what about the other kind of nuclear power, thorium or helium-3, or maybe stuff like cold fusion?
Yeah, all these things are fine. You know, the problem is that we have a policy in the world today. One part of the policy is imperial policy. They want to not simply kill fission power using uranium. They want to kill all nuclear technology, because they realize that if this thing starts to explode and proliferate and nations can become independent, then they will lose power. And then there is actually enough material in many parts of the world that are not explored or not allowed to develop. Have enormous uranium mines in Jordan and Iran and Morocco, all places in the world. That's not the big problem. The problem is that there's a policy to prevent nuclear development and to prevent moving to the next phase, which is thermonuclear fusion.
Yeah.
But you cannot come to fusion. So many Greens would say, oh, great, yeah, fusion, that's a good idea, you know, but we don't want to have fission. Well, how are you going to reach there? You know, if you have a dark age, an economy which is almost agrarian economy, how can you develop fusion power? If you have not mastered all these techniques, if you don't have an educated population, if you don't have an industrial base. So you cannot move from wood to fusion, you know, or coal to fusion. You have to go through the process of developing the ingredients, the knowledge and technology and the materials you're going to use in fusion.
Yeah.
Because theoretically it's possible, but there's enormous work to be done on what kind of materials you're going to use, and so on and so forth. So that's not it sounds good that people want to have fusion, but you cannot shut down fission, nuclear power, and say we wait until somebody comes up with a smart idea to have fusion power.
But they made a decision when they were developing nuclear energy for the first time back in the 50s, 40s. They took a decision to use uranium because it could be weaponized. But actually thorium has a higher energy density and it's not as unstable. But they never developed that part of it because you weaponize uranium. So maybe we should focus on it.
Sure. But there was an intention to use nuclear weapons to subdue other nations, as Bertrand Russell would argue earlier, that you need to develop the nuclear weapon in order to scare everyone, and use Hiroshima, for example, was used as an example. What kind of treatment you get if you go against the British, or what they at that time called Anglo-American Empire.
Yeah.
So there was an intention, of course, to use that in an evil sense, rather than use it for the benefit of humanity, because the only thing they think about is how you control the world, how you control other nations. So
I just wanted to say that in connection with that we only use like 3% of the fissile uranium in the material of that what we have. So there's like over 90, 95, 97% of the other isotope of uranium that you can actually enrich and keep on. So you have for much longer time just in that.
Yeah, but the problem is uranium is, in the nuclear technologies, some scientists may say that it's the most inefficient material to use in a nuclear power than the other isotope and radioactive material and unstable atoms, because, like he said, one of the purpose that uranium have been used is to develop a nuclear bomb, and to, like you said about the oil, that to use it as a fuel to fuel our cars, it's very inefficient way to do that, and uranium is the same. And Fukushima and Chernobyl have been a very bad example for uranium in the past 50 years.
But concerning Fukushima and also Chernobyl, in Fukushima there is no evidence that there was any dangerous increase in the radioactivity in the region. That has been recently reported by not only independent science, but even by the UN. The UN itself is very negative to nuclear power, but even the UN had issued a report saying that based on studies they've made, there was no increase. The problem is that there's the scare tactics that are being used to scare people away from nuclear power and fission power and so on.
No, it's like in the old days, when you began building trains, and then people, the media has stories about, but if you have trains, people will be run over, and they're going to run 50 kilometers an hour, and it's really the same. I mean, you want to. There's no way you, through reason, can argue against these things. So you don't. So you scare people. You like they do, oh, but then you have radioactivity and it's dangerous, blah, blah, blah. Oh, Russia is about to invade Ukraine, blah, 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 blah. You make up things. And then you run that as a story, and if you say it quick enough and often enough, a lot of people is going to believe it. And then they're going to reject what would be the same policy based on this. And Denmark actually, in this nuclear power, we became a famous psychological study for that. Because Denmark was the first country where they managed, through psychological warfare, to convince the population not to have nuclear power. I mean, all the way back to Bohr, Niels Bohr, there was a policy in Denmark, of course we're going to have nuclear power. They even had put up at all the major cities in Denmark, they had designated, you know, turf, this is where there's going to be a nuclear power plant. And then they ran this whole campaign in Denmark through this OOA, Oplysning om Atomkraft, where they just lied and lied and lied and lied again, but it was so run so much through the media, and that then people says, okay, but we don't need it. And of course the big problem is not so much that we don't get the energy from nuclear power, you know, because in some ways you can, you know, have coal power plants instead of this and that. But the point is, the whole scientific development then disappeared. Mm-hmm. And this is just with this with nuclear, with uranium. I mean, the way these stupid politicians and economic and so-called economists think of this is, it's all like one thing, you know. Now it's oil, okay, then it's uranium. But the way you think of it, if you do it from a scientific standpoint, the development, you say, okay, we can use uranium, that's nice, but then we have thorium, that's nice. And instead of having it all being one thing, or like they do now with the climate, you know, it's CO2, it's CO2, you know. Then just like you can measure how much money you have, right? An counting unit, then you can measure how bad are you through how much CO2 do you produce.
Footprint. Your footprint.
Yeah, exactly, and it's simply insane. And the same problem is, to a certain extent, that there's this, it's one thing. Mm-hmm. But what you have to do is the opposite. You have to say, no, we want all of the things because we want to know, we want to find out, how does this really work? And the more we understand it, then suddenly if you found out that this isotope is fantastic for this kind of treatment in hospitals, this one we can use for sterilization, this one is better for this one is better for that. And it's like, and the thermal or the subatomic domain, it's like it's a big field. It has tremendous potential. I mean, we looked into it a lot earlier. That we normally people think that if you know, they think in terms of elements. Oh, that's iron, that's lead, that's this. Then if they get a little smarter, then sometimes there's a little bit of isotopes, but not much. But what it turns out when we look into living matter, then isotopes is like different elements. So if you have in a molecule, if you have this isotope at a certain spot, or that isotope at a certain spot, the molecules in living processes behave differently. So it's like, it's a whole universe that we don't even, once we begin to dive in there, we will be able to do all kinds of marvelous things. But people say, no, because this is atoms, it's dangerous.
Well, sometimes when I think of this, that people are very afraid of the danger, and somebody told me once to make a sort of parallel with a knife, that without the knife, the human being would have not, how do you say, been able to carve and to construct things, and so a knife can be a fantastic tool, but at the same time it can kill. It's up to us to create the abilities from it.
The direct is actually fire, because I mean it is actually like a fire, nuclear power. I mean, like you burn something in a way. And not just.
So I'm not criticizing nuclear power at all. Of course, we should explore all our possibilities there, but we should also, just because someone is trying to scare us with it, we shouldn't just be fearless. We should still be careful with what we're doing, because with the technical capabilities we have right now, making nuclear power with thorium, for example, is much safer than uranium, much safer. So investing all your energy in this is the mentality people normally have, that nuclear power is uranium. That's the only way to make nuclear power.
Yeah, but
no, but it's interesting. I mean, it's good to.
I totally agree. It's like you said, it's not so much the nuclear power, it's nuclear knowledge. We are at the basis of it, like we saw in the 50s. In the Second World War, we had the atomic bomb, and the atomic bomb was actually, a point in the history where atomic power or atomic knowledge make a shift in, like a shift in place in the world where there is a new thing here, and since then I see that all the critic and all the fear that trying to put on it, it's not so much that it's dangerous, but it's like the knowledge, if it's get global, like you said, then those who is in power would lose their power. But in the same way, we had, the beginning with nuclear power was based on war, was based on destruction. And it's here where
I don't think Marie Curie and her husband were trying to destroy the world.
The knowledge was based on that, and the rest of the globally, then people take the same process and build it in their own countries.
It depends on what intention the people working with that technology or that tool is.
But
what do they do? What they want to? What is the purpose for that?
Yeah.
Now there are different tendencies.
Sure.
Some people want to use it as a way of controlling other human beings whom they consider as slaves. People are not worth deciding for themselves. This kind of what we call oligarchical imperial ideology is that you should not let simple people know these things.
Exactly.
You should not let Iranians have nuclear power. They are crazy. And then there are other simple people who are not completely evil. They say, yeah, but the Iranians, it's very dangerous. How can they control this? And there are crazy people in Iran. They can use this to attack other countries. So they use these things. But then there are people, scientists and politicians say, no, this is a great tool we can use for the development of society. I mean, it's like the evil starts when we had, for example, the idea of the complete fuel cycle. This was an idea which was developed with the development of nuclear power, is that you don't have so-called waste. You have a complete fuel cycle where you can recycle the rest product, because there's enormous amount of energy and isotopes there that are not used after the first fission process. But then they say, well, okay, we need nuclear power, but then we cut the process here, and then, what are we going to do with the waste? And then they make the waste the new big scare problem. It's just scary, you don't want this thing. So they try to find new smart ways where to keep the waste. It's not waste, it's very high energy radioactive material that you can use. But they cut this cycle in the middle, and they say, well, we can keep this upstairs, but this process, but then we don't have the rest of the process. Okay, we have to deal with the waste. It's like, it's this kind of decisions that are taken that.
And it could also be a good way to counter this fear, because normally
Exactly.
when you see a nation who's adopting nuclear power, they're adopting uranium nuclear power, and everybody is fearful for uranium nuclear power.
Yes, I mean, they are not allowed to because not all nations can build nuclear. There are only 5 nations in the world that can build a complete nuclear power plant.
Yeah, I think the problem is that if you're going to take care of the waste, you have to put invest some money, to have knowledge of what we do with the waste. And I think when you get the power from the nuclear energy, then why should we use money on trying what we do with the waste? We just bury it down, and if we're going to use it not in a scientific form. It's more like politics and, you know.
Sorry.
But one thing is important is that a key aspect of our economic policy developed by LaRouche is the idea of always having an increasing what we call energy flux density, energiegennemstrømningstæthed. That one of the most important parameters upon which we can be more people and everybody at a higher standard of living is dependent on if we are continually developing more intensive, more productive forms of energy, because energy powers everything else. So if we have a very inefficient energy, if we say, okay, let's throw out nuclear power and we go back to solar energy and we go back to windmills, this is going back in history. It's the equivalent of a dark age, but a real dark age where we won't have enough energy for the light bulbs. But that in human history, where we have gone from just burning wood, then we went to coal, then we went to oil. Now we're in a nuclear age, on the way, hopefully, if we win the political fight, we're on the way to a fusion-based economy. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, that it's one of the most fundamental principles about how we get economic growth, how we can reproduce our society at a higher level, is with a more productive, more intensive form of energy, and that we always have to be thinking of the next step. Yeah. Even as we're running out, we should actually be using the current energy resources as much as possible, and then it's not a problem if we're continually developing the next step.
Yeah, we went to visit the nuclear power plant at Brunsbüttel, which is west from Hamburg. And the director of the power plant there said that he had just returned a couple of, I think a year before, from a trip from Japan. This is after Fukushima, of course. And he said all the Japanese were coming to him and saying, "Why, you Germans, you're not stupid. If you're shutting down your nuclear power, you've got fusion, right? You've made the breakthrough. What is it you're not telling us?" And it's like, well, we haven't. It's a real problem.
There's been a meltdown.
And they just couldn't understand it. They said, what's wrong with you? You know, is there something you're hiding? And he's like, I'm sorry.
The funny thing is, just like you were saying with the oil and with the gas, that in the beginning, because of our inability to really use things for what they are and to get the energy, we say, oh, but it's easy, you know, chemical combustion will burn it. Mm-hmm. We get some energy here and now. But then you get to a certain point where you say, well, now we have something more with higher energy flux density like nuclear power, therefore we'll stop using this very attractive raw material wasted for energy production, because we can produce it in another way, and then we use gas and oil for something much more unique than simply getting energy. Yeah. The funny thing is, the same is probably going to happen with nuclear power, with fission power. You're going to say, oh, but you know, we have uranium and these things, but we actually have fairly limited resources of these, and it's a waste to use that for energy, because you know, energy, you take fusion, you know, you take hydrogen, and we have lots of hydrogen. You know, then we can get all the energy we need. But these other very unique materials we need for all other kinds of things. So it's like a caveman, you know, taking a rock, and then, you know, a rock of iron, you know, what can he use this for? He can use it to smash somebody else's cranium. But this same rock in a later society can be used for much more interesting things.
You can actually say that the security in this windmill alternative energy thing, what you say security, the security is that you're going to collapse. That you're going to, I mean, that you're going to die as a civilization. That's the security you have in windmills and alternative energy.
In the Middle East, you know, since you have a big part of the population which is young people, and is there an understanding that the West, the British, is there an understanding of the British Empire's role today? And also, is there an understanding that technological apartheid is being used to kill them?
Technological what?
Apartheid, technological.
Yeah. I mean, there is a. I mean, the young people, not all of them are quite acquainted with what happens in the world. You know, it's like young people everywhere else, but they are a bit more interested in figuring out because they are under the direct impact of the policies of the West. So they try to figure out what's wrong. I mean, in Iran, if you talk about the British, everybody say, yes, we know the British are behind everything. It's like, because they suffered a lot from British gains. And a large number of the Iranians still today believe that the British are behind it. They don't have exactly the same understanding we have of the British. It's not simply the British prime minister or intelligence who are running things. It's an oligarchy which functions at a much, much higher level than the simple intelligence services and military institutions. But the people do have an understanding of that. But they also, what they are looking forward to is that to benefit from the technological advances that exist. And they are completely, puzzled by the fact that the West does not want to give them or sell to them the technology because it's beneficial for the West. Like people I meet in Iran, or because Iran is specifically there enormous prohibition against all kinds of technologies to go into Iran. And they don't understand. They said this is stupid because it's not good for them that they cannot sell technology to us. So there is a certain sense of injustice, but they are also still looking forward to have a positive relationship to the West. I mean, people don't hate the West. Generally, the young people, they don't hate the West because of the treatment they are getting. I mean, there are fanatics who want to destroy the West. They don't have the means to do that. But the young population, they want to work with the West, cooperate with the West. Now, there's a typical image we get in the Western media about the young people in Iran, or that their idea of freedom is to listen to rock music and not to have the scarf or dress as they wish. It's a completely superficial image of freedom. But I met people at the university in Iran, and educated people, engineers, and so I say, well, this is not our idea about freedom. It's not that you want to listen to rock music. There is a minority of young people in Iran, teenagers and so on. They want to imitate the West in everything, but this is a minority. But the majority of young people, educated young people, they want to reach the living standards, the technological standards which have existed in Europe and in the United States. But they want to preserve their culture because they believe their culture is superior. Not superior in a chauvinistic way, but for them they say this culture fits us better than anything else.
They're very proud. They
are proud of their own culture. Of course, there's a transformation process because of the religious factor. There are different kinds of identity problems in these countries, but it's a struggle which is a good struggle because people have to figure out their identities, like in Iran or Turkey. In Iran, people say, well, we are not Arabs, we are Persians. And Persian civilization was great. It's greater even than the Arab civilization. But then they say, well, but the Arabs brought Islam to us, so are both Muslims and Persians. So, but where do you find the right equation between being a Persian civilization and Islamic civilization? Because they are not completely similar. And then you have old Iranian religions like the Zarathustrian religion, the agnostic religions, and effects from the Buddhism and other Asian religions, even inside the Islamic thinking. So there is a search for identity in Iran. We have the same thing in Turkey, but in Turkey they settled it by supporting the Muslim Brotherhood and the Erdogan's party. which is transforming the society into a completely fundamentalist way.
The problem is with this Muslim Brotherhood that they put religion in a, you know, in a black or white factor. Like, if either you have to get religious, you know, it's a way to scare people from religion, and in the same way that people who are here are, you know, put themselves on the other side.
Yes.
Like it's making a splitting group.
Yes.
Instead of, like you said, people can, when I find their identity, here you put a contrast identity to each other.
Yes.
That's
exactly.
Create a conflict and destabilize, you know, the one mind in one country to move forward.
True. I think one of these things, this is something we have written a lot about it in our magazine, Executive Intelligence Review, and discussed it, that the Muslim Brotherhood idea and this Wahhabi idea is a completely artificial creation.
Yeah.
And the British started creating this in Egypt, because in Egypt, before World War I and even after the war, and then more after World War II, because you had a movement in all the Arab countries in Africa, but the Muslim countries, for independence, national movements. Nationalism became a power, you know, because yes, the Sykes-Picot agreement, secret agreement between the British and the French, divided the Middle East into different countries. But there are different identities in Iraq or Syria or Jordan, or Jordan did not even exist. The British created Jordan. It was Transjordan, it was Palestine and Jordan. But Syrians, they don't consider themselves as Iraqis, you know, or Egyptians. They have their distinct nationality. So there you had a nationalist movement, not like European nationalist movements, freedom from British and French imperialism in all the Arab countries. So in order to stop that movement, the British created the Islamic idea. And they even used the Mufti Muhammad Abda and others to push down the nationalistic tendencies and bring up the Islamic. Why? Because the Islamic identity has no national borders. As some of these Muslim brothers say, we go from Indonesia to Morocco, we are one nation. Well, forget it. nobody will let you have this is not a nation, this is an empire. And the queen would be happy to be the head of that Islamic empire, you know. They had this crazy guy in London, Omar Bakri, who's now in Lebanon, fomenting the Shia-Sunni fight. He was in Britain. He was heading this Al-Muhajirun group, and he wrote an open letter to the queen to convert to Islam. And that they will recreate the Khilafah, you know, the Islamic state again, and that she could join. You know, so the idea was the Muslim Brotherhood were used in Egypt, in Syria, in other countries to destroy. Like in Egypt, they, you know, their idea is to destroy Gamal Abdel Nasser and the revolution he led, and the idea of building a powerful, independent Egypt. And they used the Muslim Brotherhood. They even tried to assassinate him. And the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt have been that factor until now. So they want to, and then the Saudis came up, this whole Wahhabi thing, and with the help of some Israelis burning the Al-Aqsa Mosque in 1969, setting fire to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which is very, very important for all Muslims. Then all Muslim nations, oh, we have to unite, you know? And then the Saudis came up with the idea of the so-called Conference of Islamic, Organization of the Islamic Conference, that all Muslim nations should have an organization, and that they are part of a fight against Zionism, and so forth, and so on. So the idea of using trans or pan-Islamism was the idea as an alternative to the modern nation-state idea. So they were fighting. It's like in Iraq, Abdul Karim Qasim, who made a revolt against the monarchy, who were complete British assets and wanted to nationalize the oil from British Petroleum. They said, oh, he's a communist. Yeah. And communists don't believe in God. So they, you know, it's like anybody who was a nationalist, he was called a communist who does not believe in God, an atheist. And of course, in our societies, that was not acceptable. So they used this idea against the, Abdel Nasser was not a communist or socialist. Abdul Karim Qasim in Iraq was not a socialist. They were nationalists. Nationalists in the true sense of nationalism, as Gandhi was a nationalist.
Patriots.
Patriots of their countries. Here in Europe, it's scary to say nationalist, but we don't care about these psychological complexes of the Europeans.
That's a good expression.
Yeah, we are nationalists in Iraq, It's not a bad word. People in Africa, they are proud to be nationalists. In India, they are proud to be nationalists. In China. Why? Because nationalism was an idea of fighting against imperialism.
Yeah.
Nationalism in Europe was imperialism. The German imperialists, the French imperialists, the British imperialists, the Swedish imperialists. And nationalism became a chauvinistic, imperialist idea in Europe. That's why people are ashamed. And then you had Hitler. And Hitler was not a nationalist, he was an imperialist. He had this greater Germany nonsense, So that's the Islamic card was used by the British.
Actually,
In
Syria, in the 70s, how things are started now was actually they have been trying to do exactly the same in the 70s. But in that time, the nationalist, people was much more national than they are today.
Yeah.
Where you put, like the Shia Sunni card,
Yes.
all this, confrontation between people to, when you look to, move this nationalism away from people, and many people who goes to Iraq, they say people, the nationalism are gone in people. It's all about the Kurds and the Shia and the Sunni. So this national card actually is not so much political, more like individual accept that we live in the same land.
Yeah, we have a joint mission together. We have a certain sense of our culture, and we want to develop that and contribute with that to ourselves and to our neighbors.
Yeah, and the war is now to split more of the land that already split it in 100 years, and continue that evil axis, whatever you call it.
Yeah. So they can create international mercenary forces like these Mujahideen. They have no national identity. They are part of a global force. They can move to Chechnya, they go to Afghanistan, they go to Iraq, they go to Syria, they go to Mali. They have no national identity. They are a global force.
Like Blackwater.
Exactly.
Like Blackwater.
Yeah, Blackwater, Sandline International, and these other mercenary groups. So they become a useful tool for destabilization of nations. And then the important thing for the British and now even for the Americans is how to control those groups, because they don't like to listen to Westerners. So they send the Saudi sheikhs and the Qatari sheikhs and clergy and say, oh, look, we hate the West too.
The funny thing is,
but we need to get rid of Assad, we need to get rid of the Shia, we need to get rid of this and that group.
the funny thing is, most of these people are from some land that are most they are most friends with the people who they hate, like Saudi Arabia and Israel and the United States and Britain. It's actually a very, have a very strong alliance.
Yeah.
And, they go to other countries to say you are living like the West, where their land, their king are the most cooperative with the people, which he says is the enemy. So actually, it's it's very clear, but the media.
Yes. Yeah, it's also this the use of brutality, for example. It makes people not to think clear, as you say. But our king is, he's a friend of the Americans and British, and they get weapons and they travel and educate their kids.
They have a base,
Yeah, they have bases there. But then when they
people.
use brutal force against people, if they kill your brother or father, then you stop thinking. You want to revenge. I say, I don't care if they are with America or not with America. I need weapons. I need to take my right back. And then they get people bogged down in a small game, which is controlled from the outside. Because this is the danger with religious war. People stop thinking.
It's
And it
feudalism.
doesn't end. It becomes like a vicious cycle where people just burn themselves in it.
It's like cancer.
Yes, yes.
I have one more question about this with the Middle East, because you know when this with Syria started, Turkey came into play, and it's like, is Turkey being used to be a new Turkish Ottoman Empire in this game?
Yeah. Well, it's like all these fears, like as I said, the Islamists. They say, "Oh, we can have our Islamist state from Indonesia to Morocco," you know, and then they say, tell the Turks, you know, you can have your Turkic. There's a pan-Turkic movement, and Erdogan and his foreign minister, they have some ambition to gain a little bit of the great Ottoman Empire glory, but I mean the Ottoman Empire was a big disaster. There was nothing built under the Ottoman Empire. They did not even produce weapons for themselves. They imported weapons from Europe. You know, they were completely dependent on Europe for everything. There were no major education centers built in Turkey. There were no major scientific breakthroughs or cultural breakthroughs. The only breakthrough they made is these Sufi cults they have developed, you know, which is not productive. So for people to say we want to rebuild the Ottoman Empire is completely idiotic, but it's this idiocy which is being used. And now there are even, there's a certain movement, there's a pan-Turkic movement, which is used by NATO, for example, because you have the enemies of Russia and China specifically. They are flanked by Turkish-speaking people, and then you can find them on internet. I have an image there. Maybe I can show you. There's a pan-Turkic movement which says that Turkish-speaking people should be reunited. So who are the Turkish-speaking people? Well, then,
It needs to
yeah.
warm up, I think.
I started looking at this a bit closely. Yes, this is Greater Turkey. So you go all the way from.
Oh, where did you go? Should I zoom in a bit? No. Beautiful.
Yeah, so you have even in Ukraine, you have. I started looking at that group, the Tatars in Russia and Ukraine when the crisis started.
Turkey, holy crap.
Yeah, this is Turkey. So this is. It exists as a movement actually. Like the Grey Wolves in Turkey, they are a militant group, and they also have. They are a fascist militant group. But then they have allies in all these Turkish-speaking countries, and some of their allies are in Ukraine, Ukrainian Tatars, and Russian Tatars in Kazan. They were active, actually. I checked their website, but the problem is that they write in Russian and Turkish, so I can't read any of them. But I see that they were very, very active in the Ukrainian events. But also that you have the Tatars in Russia, you have in the Caucasus. They also considered Turkish-speaking. You have Turkey, Cyprus. Some of them even say Hungary, Finland are part of the Turkish-speaking. And then you go to northern Syria, northern Iraq, northern Iran, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, all Central Asia. These are officially Turkish-speaking. But in Iran, there is a Turkish minority. In Iraq, there is a Turkish minority. In China, which is now the big thing, they call it Eastern Turkestan, which is the Uyghur opposition movement. I don't know how much support they have inside China, but obviously they have used terrorism in many cases. As I mentioned, this train station massacre and other, they use terrorism inside China to destabilize China. And actually, the head of the Uyghur movement, she was in Stockholm. They have in Sweden, they have officially they have the headquarters, but they are not so many people. It's just like 1 or 2 guys with a website. But she was invited to Sweden recently, and she even was supposed to speak on the sidelines or in the parliament. Some parliamentarians wanted to invite her to speak. So they say it simply that Chinese is a fascist, racist government. They want to kill all the Muslims there. And we have to establish our own free state. But in Turkey, as a member of NATO, you have Turkey is the center for this pan-Turkic movement. And usually it works secretly, but like Erdogan and his ministers have been openly participating in festivals and so on for this East Turkestan movement. They even put their pictures and their events on the internet. So this is another thing. It's like the Salafi movement, the Islamic movement, the Kurdish movement, now the Turkish movement, or you can invent any number of new ethnic or religious groups, but they are usually used. And those people they get completely blind when they are just focused on their greater Turkey, greater Kurdistan, greater Arabistan, we have a group in Syria and Lebanon. They call this the Nationalist Socialist Movement. I mean, they are not bad people. They're actually fighting against Al Qaeda in Syria and in Lebanon. But they have a crazy idea of Greater Syria, which Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, all the way to South Iraq. This is one nation. I don't know how they came up with that one. It's the Fertile Crescent. So, but these groups, they are very often used by intelligence services to run geopolitical games. And therefore this idea of Turkish Ottoman Empire, it's not true. They know it's not going to work. Nobody will allow them. But they can be used to send groups and support groups and armed groups in Azerbaijan and Iran and Xinjiang and China and so on and so forth, and Chechnya. So these are geopolitical games. There's no basis for, I mean, the Turks. Turkey, if you want to go back in history, Turkey is not the home of the Turks. Today's Turkey, it was called Armenia before. In the Islamic maps from the 9th and 10th century, this region, which is today Turkey, was called Armenia. There were no Turks there.
Wow, really?
The Turks came from Central Asia when they were recruited as part of the Islamic armies. And then they became more and more powerful in the Islamic armies, and they went to higher ranks in the army. So they started to intrigue against the Caliphate in Baghdad and launched several military coups. But then they moved northward from Iraq into what is today to the Anatolian steppe, and they established in 1300 Ottoman, the first one. They established what is a Turkish state. It was a small one, but then it started growing, and then they even had alliances with Venice and others to get weapons and support. So the Turks themselves, but that's not the story. I cannot go to the Turks and say, well, you have to go back to Central Asia. That's not, but they should respect themselves. They should respect the borders they have. They should respect the neighboring countries. So they should stop this nonsense about the Ottoman Empire. So, because Turkey today is a modern nation state. It has distinct borders, it has a cultural language, and so on and so forth. That's fine. But they should spare us this other madness, which is destroying us.
It's also a big problem. And that's where it comes in with this nationalism in the wrong way, which is if somebody came from our country and becomes famous, we should be proud, without taking into consideration what this guy became famous for. Like, for instance, and you have this in Denmark, oh, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, he's the head of NATO. A Dane is on this high post. And therefore we somehow is proud of that. proud? Are we proud of being one of the primary movers to get World War III and eradicate humanity? Somehow there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
But it works like that. It's the same problem we have. When people say, for instance, oh, like, you know, I'm from this party and we've had 3 presidents coming from our party. And you know, one of them might have been good and 2 of them might have been despicable pigs.
Yeah.
But they were from our party. And it's really, and this is a disease that's, it's extremely bad, this of not
Ignorance.
yeah, and it's so easy, you know, because it gives, you know, oh, we speak the same language, oh,
Yeah.
we came from the
It's,
same British,
it's
therefore,
false pride, false pride,
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
not based on any achievement.
Now,
It's like
isn't it obvious that much of this, I mean, like these groups who are having these, who are being used, you can say, in this manner, they go into, it connects into the arms trade, the narcotics trade even, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And
some
the
of the-
question I have is also like, because I understand that much of the opium from Afghanistan, is it true that how much is the Saudi Riyal actually part of the financing of these, or the money flows into
Yeah,
this?
I don't think that Saudis mix their money with the drug money because they are different channels. The drug money goes through the international banking system. The City of London centered global financial system. What the Saudis do is that they use both money from the oil, but also you have wealthy Saudi families, businessmen and so on, who give donations.
But it's dollars or they use
Whatever.
okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
But of course they need to use, if they want to buy weapons in the international market, they need to have dollars or euros or whatever, you know. But it's not specifically the currency itself which is the issue. The issue is that there's a policy to finance activities, and then you have different groups, different countries finance different groups. Sometimes they look like they are against, like Qatar today. They support the Muslim Brotherhood, they support al-Nusra and terrorists in Syria, but the Saudis don't want to support those. But they support another group, you know? But at the end, they are destroying everyone. But it's,
Saudi Arabia.
yeah,
But it's Turkey in the influence sphere of the Saudi Arabia in the way of financing? Or?
yeah, they have been, Turkey?
Yes.
Yeah, they have been part of the, I mean, a great deal of Turkey's economic boom was based on money coming from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and so on, in addition to hot money coming from financial markets, because they offer, like Brazil and other emerging markets, they offer very high interest rates on investments in the country. So the Turkish banking and financial system is hyperinflated, but the Turks have been using these resources to expand their economic base, but also to expand in other countries, in Africa and everywhere. I mean, like Turkish Airlines is suddenly one of the largest airlines in Europe. It's a global airline because they had so much resources to buy up, and also they can run airlines to areas which European, because of the political destabilization, they stopped flying there. So the Turks are taking over all flights to East Africa, to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and so on and so forth. But this is part of the financial boom they had. But now they are diving a little bit because they are both quarreling with the Saudis and the Emirates because of the Muslim Brotherhood dilemma. Because the Arab Emirates and Saudis suddenly say we don't like the Muslim Brotherhood, you know, and they are opposing them. But it's part of a game. I mean, like I think I tried to explain that in Egypt, for example, they supported the Muslim Brotherhood to come to power, but now they went against the Muslim Brotherhood, supporting a secular military general against the Muslim Brotherhood, who are all put in prison and they might face death sentence. But the Saudis say, fine, no problem, kill them. But then the Qataris support the Muslim Brotherhood. So people say, oh,
why do you think they do that?
well, there are people in the Middle East who say, oh, there's a fight between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but that's good for Syria and Iraq. Well, it doesn't matter. Why is it good for Iraq and Syria? because they agree they want to destroy Syria, Egypt, and Iraq. And ultimately they want to destroy Turkey and Iran, because these are greater nations than they are. They have a specific mission, these nations. They have higher research, as I explained, that they have a certain identity, a young population, educated population, and they want to be independent. And they are republics, unlike Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which are slave systems.
But are not Turkey and Israel allied?
No, I mean
with the Great Game, I mean.
Yeah, they were. They had a special relationship with Israel, but it has been a bit tense between Turkey and Israel, because the Turks needed, for populistic reasons, to oppose Israel to become popular among Muslims.
Erdogan.
Erdogan,
That's how,
yes.
the
Yes.
knowledge of him with that ship that come from Turkey.
They sent this ship to Gaza, which was shot by the Israeli army, and they killed some Turkish activists. And then Turkey made a big uproar against Israel, and Erdogan in this economic forum in Switzerland, what is it called? He had a big fight in public with Shimon Peres. That made Erdogan very popular in the Muslim world a few years ago. But that's populism, it's not based on anything real. But anyway, I was talking about Egypt. The Saudis suddenly oppose the Islamists and support a secular military general. And the Qataris support the Islamists. Well, I don't care what they try to explain why they support this or that group. What I care about is the end result is Egypt is destroyed.
Yeah.
That's the result, that's the goal.
If they carry out these death sentences, it's going to be an explosion.
Where in Egypt?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there is both terrorism, but also the clashes every day. People are killed every day in Cairo, but it's not reported.
But it's also, I think, it's this you said yesterday night went through. I mean, that somehow we are caught in thinking of many of these countries, as as an entity which is there with certain people and tradition and history, but most of it is not. It's artificial creations like Saudi Arabia, like you went through. How the British created Saudi Arabia. How, the head of Saudi Arabia saw himself as being a loyal subject to the British Empire.
Yes.
And therefore they run policies which is to destroy what Britain consider the enemies of the empire. And there doesn't have to be any more reason than that. And people have been, like what you explained yesterday about Saudi Arabia, you have no idea that it really was like that. And then, when Lyndon LaRouche comes out and say, why did Saudi Arabia run 9/11? Because the British ordered it. Then, if you know that they have always been run out of the British or Foreign Office, then you say, of course it has to be that way. They wouldn't dare to do such thing if it had not been ordered by the British.
Sure, because you need protection. After doing that, you need a big power to protect you. Because sorry. No, I said somebody in the seminar in Japan was asking about terrorist groups and so on. This terrorist group, and I said, look, there is no single terrorist group in the world which is not affiliated with an intelligence service. It's almost impossible. If two people sit in a room, this is not how it works. You don't have two young people in a room and say, let's create a terrorist group. It never happens. Terrorist groups are recruited and created by intelligence services. Why? Because if you run a terrorist group, what do you need? The first thing you need is protection from a state. Because you need to move people, you need to recruit people, you need to get weapons, you need to get training. These things you cannot do in a cellar. You need to plan things, you need to finance things, you need an exit route when things don't function, you need passports, you need people at the airport who will take you the back door. So there is no private enterprise terrorist group. All terrorist groups are controlled by intelligence services. That's a a rule, basic rule in intelligence. So when you see somebody say a terrorist group, you have to look the wires, where they get the signals from. You know, they have wires here. They get signals. You have to discover the frequency of the signal in their back and discover which state, which intelligence service or group of intelligence services that are backing this group and what is the function of it. And this is why I don't know how this thing started. I know I lost the connection.
9/11?
The 9/11, yes. Because to do such a major operation, you need enormous cover-up. You know, it's like the killing of Kennedy. You need a whole state apparatus and a global media to cover up for you the exit way. So the people who assassinated the president, the 3 gunmen, can slip, and then all the traces are wiped out. Who did that? So the Warren Commission, the CIA, the FBI, everybody was involved, had to be involved in the cover-up. You know, people at very, very high levels. And it's the same thing with 9/11. Who's protecting the terrorists who carried out the 9/11? Well, George Bush, Cheney, and Obama, the head of state of the United States. You know, because you cannot run something so big on private initiative. It doesn't work that way. Terrorism doesn't work that way.
You wanted to say something?
Yeah, earlier this year, Israel came out and said that a strike on Iran was very likely this year, and immediately afterwards they shut down all the embassies. How do you see this?
The Iranians shut.
Yeah,
No, the Israelis shut down their own embassies.
all their own embassies. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to. They always have had this intention to strike against Iran, but then the Americans and British, they don't always follow an Israeli agenda. They have their own agenda, so they don't think the time is correct.
But haven't Israel already struck Iran a little bit?
No, just to keep the conflict going, you know.
Because
No,
I heard
they-
something that a plane and...
No, they had bombed something in Syria,
Yeah.
a nuclear facility in Syria a couple of years ago. But there were many assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists in Tehran and so on. And people suspect it's either Israeli intelligence or British, a combination of British, Israeli intelligence, whatever. But the other reason why it does not happen is that there are people, even in the US military, who say this is madness. You know, you don't know what you are talking about. You strike a place like, first of all, you will not be able to destroy the Iranian nuclear facilities with simple bombs, not even with bunker busters. You need to use nuclear bombs, small, medium, whatever. That's the only efficient way to take them out, because many of them are very deep down in mountain areas. The other thing is that the Iranian reaction was to set fire to the whole Gulf. You know? Iran does have assets everywhere, but they don't use them. It's surprising how restrained and calm the Iranians are after all these provocations and economic sanctions. I mean, they have people who can make hell in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and Emirates and so on, but they don't do it because they know also that the price is too high. And there were American militaries and even people in Europe who were in the military. They know the price would be too high for a strike against Iran. And therefore, that's keeping people in place. Say, look, don't play games with this. These are doomsday scenarios. Maybe the day will come, they will play doomsday scenarios. But the time has not come for that. Now they are busy with the bail-in, bail-out of the banking financial system, and they want to force nations to pay. If they pay, fine, you will die later, not immediately. It's like, we will shoot you under your knee, we will not shoot you in the head. But we will bleed you slowly. But the doomsday scenario means if a group of nations, powerful nations, say no to the bailout system, then they might have to resort to the doomsday scenario. And then they have assets like Israeli Netanyahu types. But also remember, sorry, there's one thing, that they were inside Israel. There was a movement by former intelligence and military, the head of the intelligence, the Mossad, the former head of the Mossad, the former head of the Shin Bet, which is the security services, and the former defense minister, 3 of them. They came out publicly and said, Mr. Netanyahu has lost his marbles. He's crazy. you don't play games with Iran. They said it publicly, and they created a movement in Israel. They said, look, you want to destroy Israel? Okay, go ahead to bomb Iran. You know?
They couldn't take care of Hezbollah, which is just a small military group, which is, you know, allied with Iran.
Yes.
If you cannot take care of this that's beside you, how?
Yeah. I mean, the Hezbollah, the war in 2006, I mean, the Israelis failed in dealing with Hezbollah. And this was a big shock for people.
Exactly.
You know? Because, I mean, Israel is not the almighty power that people think it is. I mean, it's the Israeli intelligence. They are powerful because they have protection. Exactly as I mentioned, to be a terrorist, you need protection. The Israeli Mossad can do lots of operations internationally because they are protected by the British, by the US, by the Commonwealth countries, Australia, and these. They provide security for them when the operations fail. So therefore, when the operation fails, it's not discovered. Yeah. But when it succeeds, they say, "Oh, the almighty Mossad, they killed this guy. How did they find him?" You know.
But they have nuclear power. They have one of the strongest powers in the world.
They have nuclear bombs, you mean?
Yeah.
They do have nuclear bombs, but they are not. It's fascinating for me is that they steal water from the Palestinians and Jordanians, little water, instead of using nuclear power to desalinate seawater. They could get. But even the Israelis are under pressure from the British and the United States not to develop nuclear technology. Nuclear bombs, no problem. You can use that.
Hey,
but nuclear technology, no, forget it.
Destruction, go ahead. Development.
Sorry.
And then you have Tony Blair in the middle there.
We haven't heard so much about Syria since Ukraine took center stage. Do you have an evaluation about where things stand now and future prospects for settlement?
Yeah, I mean the situation is completely tragic in Syria. That there's a small picture and then there's the large picture. The small picture inside Syria is like, but we cannot look at it that way because the situation in Syria is connected to the world politics. And whatever happens in Syria, even in a small street, has to do with global politics. Because the forces who are involved in backing this war to destroy Syria, there are many groups, many forces. But there is on the ground is that, when this whole thing started, when this whole thing started, the ambition was like Syria would be like Libya. It would take 2 months at the highest evaluation for Assad regime to collapse, because this is what happened to Libya, to Gaddafi. But it did not happen because, first of all, Assad is actually popular in the country, and people can see that the forces who are coming from outside, these religious fanatics, and the opposition who are sitting in 5-star hotels in Britain and Turkey, these are not really doing it for the nation. They have their own agenda. So a lot of the people in Syria, they don't support the opposition. They actually support the government. And the Syrian army and security forces did not disintegrate like in Libya. So they remained intact to a certain extent. But the country is so large, they cannot control the whole country. So they focus on certain areas and leave other areas, like in the east to the border with Iraq, and in the north, they leave it for these opposition groups because very, very large area you cannot control. But anyway, they had, after the first offensive of these internationally backed terrorist groups, and al-Nusra and the so-called Free Syrian Army and ISIS, all kinds of groups. They have the same purpose, and they might get weapons from different groups, but their mission is the same: is to destroy Syria and cut it into small pieces. But Turkey is involved in arms were coming from Libya, which was destroyed. Militants and arms were shipped from Benghazi under the nose of the CIA and American. That's why they became vulnerable for the attack on the U.S. embassy in Benghazi, because they were working very closely with these same militant groups. And that's why they became vulnerable for the attack, which killed the American ambassador.
And seemingly the ambassador was that might have wanted to stop this whole thing.
That's
So we had
yeah.
to be shut up.
Yeah.
Very
But there was a process, there was a rat line, it's called, of moving arms and militants from Libya to Turkey and then from Turkey into Syria. So there was a very, very large offensive in the beginning, but the Syrian army could push it back at a very great loss. But then this meat grinder continues. But in recent months, the Syrian army, with the support of Hezbollah and Iran and Iraqi militias, Shia militias, unfortunately, this is what's going on. You have Iraqi militias, the Hezbollah are involved on the ground. And Iran openly say, we support Assad because this is a strategic red line for us. If Assad falls, then there will be bigger problems in the region. And they say openly, we support the Syrian government. So the Syrian army in the recent months was taking more and more of these cities on the border to Lebanon so they can shut the logistics and supply routes from Lebanon, which is split there between supporters and people opposed to the Syrian government. And then they could even stop the flow from Jordan in the Daraa region in the south. So the only place where the opposition, these terrorist groups that could come, is they were through Turkey. Now they're attacking made a flanking operation on northern Syria in Latakia to reach the Mediterranean. But it's very obvious that the Turks allowed them to go through Turkey, and they even had military backup when they shot the Syrian airplane like 2 weeks ago. The Turks did shoot it down. So Turkey is completely involved, and the Saudis and everybody else is involved in sending weapons to it. So the Syrian situation it will just continue burning, and this country will continue being destroyed. There's no end. There was an opportunity, that's why it's connected to global politics, when the Geneva II, when Kerry finally realized that should sit down with Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and cook something together, because this conflict is not going to end, they cannot overthrow Assad, and then everybody was talking about that these opposition groups, they are not really freedom fighters as we thought. These are hardcore terrorist groups, and they are recruiting in Europe. They are recruiting.
I thought they were pro-democracy.
Yeah.
The media told me that.
Yeah, but then the media started saying, okay, these are terrorists. Everybody should know these are terrorists, We should find a peaceful solution for this. And then you had the Geneva, but then when this whole Ukraine thing started, the Geneva agreement on Syria was sabotaged, and you had a completely new process, and Syria is left to burn slowly, and continue to being destroyed. So there is no solution inside Syria.
So there's no way that the Syrian army could stop.
Now they made a air bridge, they call it that in English, between Jordan, because in Jordan they have a military bases where they train all the terrorists. And before they took them from Lebanon and to Syria, now
they fly them to
yeah,
Turkey.
it's an official
airway,
air bridge from Jordan to Turkey.
Yes.
So
it even came
have to get going. It's like we have to get terrorists in the Syria, train them, military weapons.
Yeah.
And it's not because they fail, it's the perfect scenario for Syria's enemies. Because, they wouldn't use anything other than, people kill themselves. And
they are destroying
again about this nationality.
Yes.
It's it's not in people anymore. It's like Sunni, Shia, this place, the other place.
Christians,
And the funny thing now, the terrorists are fighting themselves.
They are.
You are Allahu Akbar, the others say the same. And what,
Sure.
But you also have to see the British intention in this. It's not that one side or another side should win. It never is.
No.
It's they should destroy each other.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing is rubble, and then come the British savior in and reorganizes the world.
Yeah, they will create 4 or 5 smaller countries, if they survive at all. It's like Qatar and Bahrain, and where they can pump oil if they have some resources. If they don't have resources, they leave them to die.
No, it's only Bahrain is 1 million citizens, or
Yeah,
a
less.
bit more or less,
Yes.
and Qatar is 400 or 300,000
Yeah.
citizens, so, you know, you can, you know, do whatever you like to do with it.
Yeah, it's tragic, you know.
Exactly.
It's a
I just think of the media in Sweden. It's, I think it's even more simple-minded and more narrow than here in Denmark, because it's so about the war situation in Ukraine and in Syria. It's very the Russians are the bad. We should hate them all,
Yeah.
because they are not for homosexuality.
Yeah.
Then we should all cut off the heads, and there are all these articles about the Syrian opposition that we hate the rest of the Syrians but not the oppositions, and I mean it's so you don't have any debate.
no.
And if somebody dares to say, well, hey, the debate about Russia is not, you know, it's not so simple as that.
No.
Oh, Putin friend,
Yeah.
you're. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's so hateful. Everybody are talking about love, rainbow colors, love, love, and then as soon as somebody is saying, "Hey, I'm not agreeing with that," fascist, you hate homosexuals, cut the head off.
They say in Germany now, they say Putin verstehe, and it's like Holocaust denying.
Oh my God, it's nuts.
So you get a stamp, right?
It's
like,
nuts.
But you see, this is the also it goes back to this idea of history, because what they want to explain for people, first of all, you cut history into successive, you know, a number of events which maybe have nothing to do with each other. So you don't see the connection. That there's a process, a deeper process, a historical, philosophical basis for what's going on. And not simply it's either oil, you know, they want to take the oil. They try to explain things for people who are a little more intelligent than the ones you talk about. Say, oh, they want to go in Iraq to get the oil. Well, that's not the truth, because Iraqi oil, America is not getting Iraqi oil, you know. But their idea is that to disconnect all these events from history, in the eyes of the simple people, the citizens. But then they have to give people a simplistic explanation for things, which have to do with the basic instincts of human beings: greed, you know, power, lust, control, egoism, and this kind of stuff. And therefore it becomes plausible for people, yes, Putin is an egoistic, power-hungry person, you know, that's why he's doing that. There is nothing more than that, you know.
Right.
He thinks Russia is great and blah, 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 and should crush everybody else. So people are satisfied with these simplistic things.
It's so,
you know, and that's the way to control people, because you present to them an idea that's very, very simple, you know, and which they can recognize in their weaknesses, because everybody is greedy, everybody loves money, you know, everybody wants to get this or that in a certain way. So they say, oh, this is plausible. Putin is a bit more extreme than I am, but the human beings are like this, you know. And they are corrupt.
That's a good
Nowadays, you know, there is no, if you look at CNN, BBC, Danish media, Swedish media, German media, you know, it's the same story. Even Al Jazeera and it's you know.
It's really brainwashing.
And
he told the story about Al Jazeera last night.
They have, you know, there have been some videos where you can see it's the same script they're using.
Oh.
You know, it's like
Same
I get a script here to say the news, then a whole another station got the same words and the same script, you know, and is this, you know, this is not news, this is not a channel. Every channel should have independent journalists who can be there and say the truth. And if you look at Syria,
the world government,
you know, there are BBC where was in Syria, and the journalists showed actually something that was very true. In Seyda Zeynep, it's a place a bit outside of Damascus, where as soon as, you know, this zero, how they call it, to overthrow the President Assad. You know, it had been worked much before, from 2006, to get weapon in Syria. When the 0 hour came, then, you know, the militants walk in the streets and say all the Shiites outside from here, it's only Sunni rules, and they put speakers everywhere where, you know, they're reading a Quran, so people get very afraid, and you know, this something they showed in BBC. A month after, they showed something completely different. It's like the journalist crew have never been there. And when you discuss with people, no, have you seen BBC? Have you seen BBC? You know, and everything, you know, is the same thought, is the same mønster, is the same
Pattern.
Mm-hmm. You know, I can, when people say to me, yeah, Russia is bad, I don't even, you know, I don't even have to ask them why, because it's the same pattern.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about the Middle East, when you talk with people here, you say, yeah, what do you think is the, you know, we have to do to make it good? And they say, yeah, we cannot, we fight all the time with each other, and the only thing we can do that is by let Al-Qaeda rule us. Yeah. And that was,
oh my God,
you know,
crazy.
And the you know, the manipulation process, it's, you know, when Hitler, he didn't only develop the military knowledge, it was the propaganda he came with, you know, and the propaganda machine actually, I'm very developed very much in the sense of way that I can get manipulated by thinking the other way, where, you know, like I follow one Al Jazeera, when it came, it's like, yeah, with the Arab and with Muslims, and come here, and suddenly it's just turned around 180 degrees, and you know, you can't know what to trust in media, even it was with me or against me. You know?
That's what.
But
Sorry.
the media is, especially CNN. I don't know if you know about the journalist. What was her name? Amber Linen or Lyon or something. She quit her position as a journalist at CNN, but not before she had revealed that CNN only reported stories from other nations which they were paid to report, and hid other stories for money also. So the media is controlled and it's official.
It's so much evidence that, you know, we can have a whole day about the evidence, even back to 91 in the Iraq war. You can see the CNN crew, how they are creating the story.
Yeah, the famous
in the studio. And that was on the national TV, you know, and people were...
It was shot in the studio.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, everybody has the same philosophical basis, or everybody, all the ideas and thoughts and what people are discussing is just stuff they're repeating in this echo chamber of social media and news. And every individual is allowed some degree, some modifications, so he can labor under the illusion that he's an individual with his own free thoughts. But in the end, it's just the same thing that is repeated over and over again, and nothing can be said which is critical of this Ponzi scheme we are living under.
This is one thing. It is because maybe you want to say some rounding words before we conclude this section, this part, because it is. It's been very exciting discussion.
Yeah.
But it's also just to not let it here, like, you know, because there's also one thing which you can always measure is what is your intention, and this is what we are professionals in, you know, that our professionals say that our intention is development, and this that people should really have access to what Hussein was talking about, the Silk Road and these concepts, how it was developed. I mean, people should have a vivid idea how the world can look like, to be able from that standpoint to help us to fight so it gets to be that way. Because it's like this, the intention, if the most people, their intention is very small. It's their intention to promote themselves or whatever, their family life and so on. But this is, so maybe you want to say some, like rounding words and then we...
I think that was perfect.
Exactly. You already said it.
Yeah, no, it's just like, I mean, obviously everybody here, they read a lot, they think a lot and so on, but it has to be channeled, the energy, but also the kind of work you do, research you do, it has to be channeled into what Farida says, what is the intention. Because you have to have a goal. Why do you want to learn these things? Why do you want to know this or that thing? So, but also not to get dive into all the details, which are not useful. When I joined the movement, I used to read like 4 or 5 Arabic newspapers every day. And then one lady said, look, stop doing that. She didn't like that idea because said you cannot get intelligence from reading newspapers. You have to study history. You have to, find out who's moving what are the ideas in the heads of people. That's intelligence, not reading the newspapers. I mean, I did read it because a lot of the things I did was involved in talking to journalists and media, but then I started calling people in the region, trying to study the history of our region. I realized I don't know much about Iraq. The things we learned in school we had forgotten because it was a lot of propaganda, and then it was not for any purpose, just to pass the exam. So the idea of what a human being is, what a human civilization is, what a society is, this is should be the central focus, and how to enrich that individual and that knowledge and contribute to that. So it's like, so we don't, some people say, I like this thing, I like that thing, I study this, but we have to try to study and learn as much as possible, but it has to flow into this direction of what kind of change we want to do in the world. And that we should think about ourselves as important. Not in an egotistic way, or arrogant way, but say, my role is important, and I have to prove it. I have to work hard to prove that my role is important. I have to find evidence of that what I have been doing has an effect. It's not enough to say, well, I told people that, they didn't listen to me. But that's not enough.
Or I don't think that, I'm not like that.
Yeah, or I'm not like those people, but I'm going to live my own life and that's it.
And I don't, it's too much, so I don't, from either side, I'm just here.